This is the temperature in Antarctica, Vostok, over the last 420,000 years. 400, 0 years. This is 0 degree, 0 degree, 0 degree, 0 degree, 0 degree. What calls attention is that this is the Holocene, this is the interglacial we are in for the last 8 to 10,000 years. And the temperature is rather stable compared with the other interglacials. It is stable. The one we are in is stable around 0 degrees in Antarctica. And the same for Greenland and other places close to the poles. So the poles are roughly around 0 degrees. And that's probably the reason we didn't crash out like in all the others. For instance, this one. It passes the 0 degrees with over 2 degrees. As soon as it crosses 2 degrees above the 0 degrees, probably with the poles melting, it crashes into a glacial. And in a medium line, it goes down for the next 100,000 years. Uh, Pretty much the same thing. As soon as the temperature reached 2 degrees in the poles, Antarctica in this case, it crashes into a glacial and it keeps on getting cooler. The whole Earth, by the way. Uh, the same, it passes 2 degrees and it crashes into a glacial. It passes 2 degrees and it crashes into a glacial for 100,000 years, each of them roughly. So the good thing, it seems, is that we didn't reach this 2 degrees at no point. So what we can learn from this glacials and interglacials is that we have to take care that we don't melt the poles as a whole because it will cross the 2 degrees line and we will crash into a glacial for over 100,000 years. And it will be the end of everything, life as it is, and most probably extinction, for 100,000 years at least, for everything that is outside the tropical and intertropical regions. So the West, as we know it today, is roughly outside uh, the tropical and intertropical region. So what we claim is that during glacials, humans only survive in tropical and subtropical regions. Since our consensus and since our even our alternative historians are very focused on the West, um, we don't find evidence of cultures because we were in a glacial of 100,000 years. And the other interglacials were very short. And even if there was something in the West, I mean, cultures like we recognize them today, um, we wouldn't find anything of them for a number of reasons. Let's say because metals will rust and be integrated in the soil, etc., or things will be recycled, or or even destroyed to by religions, by cultures, to wipe out the past, that there was a past. That's if there was a past, because these interglacials are all very short compared to the actual one. This is as long or even longer than the actual one, but that's 400,000 years ago. So every glacial of roughly 100,000 years, uh, we humans somehow can get out of that glacial. It's here. It's roughly 100,000 years ago, roughly 100,000 years ago, etc. So we think that humans lived for all these 420,000 years. In fact, for at least 2 million years. That's a subject of other videos. Um, but in the tropics and possibly in the subtropics, in the West, if humans were living, having cultures and economies, it should have been in the interglacials, which are very short. We only got our technology after 8 to 10,000 years being in the interglacial, and there's not in this one are much shorter than 8 to 10,000 years. This one is probably longer than 8 to 10,000 years, but it's 400,000 years ago. So we think that the humans that live in the tropics and subtropics, that includes, for instance, South America and Africa and Southeast Asia, Indonesia are quite close. Oceania is in the tropical region as well. So humans living there knew how to get out of the glacial. Why it takes them 100,000 years is subject of other videos. But how do we think they get out of each glacial? That is by, first of all, I'm a forestry engineer and I'm very much in favor and in increasing forests and especially carbon agroforests to solve our challenges, including to avoid us crashing out of our actual Holocene interglacial. That said, in glacials, cutting forests and starting agriculture could have been the main reason they got out of these glacials, but they had to wait. There's evidence they had to wait for 100,000 years to be in a position to get out of the deeper growing glacial with this agriculture. Cutting forests exposes more soil, and agriculture never really covers very well the soil as climax forests do. So it increases the temperature. We have several videos that expansion of agriculture leads to increasing temperature. So we have to avoid increasing our agriculture to not reach the plus 2 degrees and to not crash out of our interglacial into a deep glacial. So, but once you're there and at the right moment, which seems to be 100,000 years, they could have gotten out of this very deep glacial, 0 degrees, 8 degrees cooler than we are now, at least at the poles, by agriculture, by cutting forests that were reduced because of the glacial, but still the tropics and subtropics would have forests. They could cut them and populate the world according to where they have forests or to cut or where they could practice agriculture to keep the planet warmer. So they got out of it with agriculture, with cutting forests, and now we have to stay in around this 0 degrees in the poles. We have to increase because we have some peaks and that point to the 2 degrees, and the 2 degrees will lead to us crashing out of the interglacial we are in, and that would basically mean extinction or at least total dependence of the West, at least of Europe, Western Eurasia, and the United States. But in fact, more correctly, I would say everything that is not tropical and subtropical would suffer extinctions or economic collapse and would totally depend on tropics and subtropics. So the ancients in the tropics and subtropics got out of the glacial by agriculture. There's one more way they could have gotten out, but that's for other videos. And so they got out by massive agriculture and populating of whatever they could populate, with the intention that these peoples, these humans, hybrids, would practice agriculture and form cultures because they have to keep the earth free of forests to get out. And now we have to create more forests and carbon agroforests to stay in our range, to stay around the 0 degrees. And I think that at least for the last decades, we're crashing out. At least there is this risk to crash out of the 0 degrees, reach the 2 degrees, and to crash into the next glacier, where we probably will have no way to get out of for at least 100,000 years. That is, if the knowledge to get out is still amongst us, which I have some doubts, but we can discover by looking to the past and to our ancestors. Obviously, our ancestors come out of the tropics and the subtropics because they could survive during the glacials.